because you need to start it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining. I invite those who are here already to add their names in the chat and pronouns, where they are joining us from, organizations and cities. We'll start in a couple of minutes. Hello, hello. Wow. Hi, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us. My name is Adam Usa. I'm the National Coordinator of From Borders to Belonging. I'm also the National Projects Manager at Rainbow Refugee Society, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. From Borders to Belonging is a solidarity coalition of grassroots and civil society organizations centered on support and advocacy with LGBTQI refugees and newcomers. As national organizations, From Borders to Belonging respectfully recognizes that we live and work on the traditional and unceded territories of many Indigenous nations and First Nations people throughout Canada. At From Borders to Belonging, we strive for respectful partnerships with all the peoples of this country as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. We stand in solidarity with Indigenous people everywhere. We stand in solidarity with forcibly displaced LGBTQI people in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, and all civilians who lost their lives or loved ones. We are resolved in our commitment to create equitable migration pathways and communities of belonging for all forcibly displaced LGBTQI people. The current crisis is happening in the context of over 75 years of conflict and requires a long-term solution that centers peaceful negotiations, is informed by Palestinians' rights to self-determination, and ensures the protection of civilians' lives, equity, dignity, and respect for all. If you're just joining us, please write in the chat. I see many people who already did that, to write their names and pronouns, where you're joining us from, and how are you connected, if you are connected to LGBTQI refugee protection and settlement. Welcome again. You have two ways you can choose your own participation style. You have the first option is you can join us in the interactive space to ask questions and share experience live. You will be part of the recording that becomes part of a resource hub online. You can click on the raise the hand button if you'd like to join the interactive space, and my colleague Norma can add you as a panelist, and we can see your webcam as well. And the second option is you can stay as you are in the webinar audience and post questions in the Q&A or a chat. My colleagues Charlene and Norma will be keeping an eye on the chat and Q&A for today. And we'll open the floor for a few questions after each section. So please raise your hand right now if you would like to be added to a panelist. We are aiming through those webinars to build a learning community together. As alone, we don't know it all. So make sure that you include your voice, but also make space for other voices to be heard. This is a space to learn, and sometimes that means making mistakes, and sometimes learn into discomfort. All cases, take good care of yourself as you're learning. Our guiding principles focus on advancing human rights and dignity for all, including marginalized communities based on sexuality, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics, acting in solidarity with those facing persecution, respecting indigenous peoples, addressing intersectional barriers, advocating for safe migration and refuge rights, and prioritizing the inclusion and leadership of LGBTQI refugees in organizational efforts. I see a few of you joined as panelists already. In a world that is far, sorry, I think I missed this slide here. Yeah. In a world that is far from achieving the full embrace of diversity and inclusion, we gather today to discuss a topic that resonates deeply with principles of human rights and social justice. Across the globe, LGBTQI individuals have faced persecution, discrimination, and violence merely for being true to themselves. Many have been forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge and the promise of a better life. Canada, a land celebrated for its commitment to diversity and acceptance, has been a beacon of hope for LGBTQI refugees and newcomers. Here, we arrive with the aspiration of living free from the shadows of fears and prejudice, with the belief that we can build lives rooted in love and acceptance. Yet in our cities, in our streets, and even within our institutions, we have recently witnessed a troubling surge of organized anti-2SLGBTQI+ protests. Hate in all its forms stands a barrier to the ideals we hold dear. We recognize that this is not merely a challenge for those it directly affects, it's a challenge for all of us who champion the values of diversity and inclusivity. And it's our shared responsibility to address this wave of hate, to counter misinformation, and to protect those who have sought refuge on these shores. Today, our panelists and advocates will guide us through this complex landscape, offering strategies and insights on how we can come together, forging alliances that promote respect, safety, and tolerance. And together we will explore ways to counter hate while preserving the ideals of a progressive and compassionate Canada. And please join me in welcoming our panelists for today. Arthi Armugam, she, her, they, them. Arthi is a co-chair of the steering committee at From Borders to Belonging, and they are a board member of Rainbow Refugee Association of Nova Scotia. Originally from the Temuan territories in Malaysia, Arthi is dedicated to nurturing mutually respect communities with an emphasis on sustainable futures. They work to enrich life of gender diverse and LGBTQI+ individuals in their role as coordinator of the Newcomer to LGBTQI+ youth program at the YMCA of Greater Halifax. She's a certified R2 resilience practitioner and a certified mental health practitioner focused on refugee and immigrant population. They hold a Bachelor of Arts degree in Gender, Race, Sexuality, and Social Justice, and the Master of Art degrees in Women and Gender Study. Artie enjoys backcountry camping and exploring hiking trails in Chibuktuk, Halifax. Thanks for joining us, Artie. And I would like to welcome my manager, Alex Dugman Mansour, they, them. Alex is a transgender Palestinian who was born in and primarily raised in Santiago de Chile. They are a Chilean lawyer specializing in human rights, reproductive and sexual health law, LGBTQI plus rights, and refugee rights. Alex holds an LLM from the University of Toronto. They serve as the co-executive director of Rainbow Refugee and is also the president of the Canadian Council for Refugees. Their work primarily centers around facilitating refugee sponsorship for individuals with diverse sexual orientations, gender identities, expressions, and sex characteristics, designing programs and services for LGBTQI plus newcomers, and advocating for the rights of LGBTQI refugees at various levels of the government. Additionally, they have provided advisory and expert opinions, represented Canada at international forums for refugee protection, conducted webinars and workshops for numerous local and international organizations, and authored several publications. Welcome, Alex. And then we have Onar Usar. She, her is a racialized queer settler who arrived in Canada as an international student more than 2 decades ago. She's passionate about community education and advocacy, and currently works as Positive Space Initiative coordinator at Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, OCASI. Welcome again. That was a long introduction, sorry for that. Let's start with the first section. Alex, I will start with you. How are queers and trans newcomers in our communities are experiencing the waves of hate?
Thank you, Adam. And thank you, everybody, for joining this very important conversation that we're going to have today. I want to say first that the three of us here as panelists, we're exploring these questions with you. And we want to share our expertise, but also we want to hear from you and your expertise. I want to locate myself and say that I am joining from the unceded and stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'm a migrant and therefore an uninvited guest to this land, but I am very grateful to be here and to be welcomed in various ways by different Indigenous peoples. How I'm connected to the work, you heard my bio, so I'm not going to repeat that, but as a racialized migrant and trans person myself, I am personally affected by the rise of transphobia that is happening right now, and homophobia, and also as a newcomer. And also, I am participating right now in the National Anti-Hate Coalition that represent many 2SLGBTQI organizations from across Canada. So I also bring a little bit of the information that we have shared nationally. So first, that's what I wanted to locate us about and say that, there has been this very populist campaign to try to gain popular support and electoral victories to groups who want to roll back human rights. And I think that's the frame that we're starting from. It's like an American-style politics calling trans right and education as gender ideology. And this import also from the trends that we are seeing down south in the US to Canada have been taking a lot of power and take here. And there is misinformation and fear, for instance, that have been going around telling newcomer communities and especially targeting newcomer communities around teachers hiding information from parents about their children's sexual orientation and gender identity, sex education, and healthcare for trans youth. this is what started the rise, and now it has expanded. And although we see that many of the people that are protesting against trans and gender diverse, how they say the gender ideology education, really, when you go to the marches, you see that their posters and what they're protesting goes beyond that, and is now really attacking our identities. There is this is not new for our newcomers communities. We have been experiencing the impact of hate, violence, and discrimination for a long time, but I feel it is new now that it is being added not only to our xenophobia and racism, but also now to transphobia and homophobia. Frontline workers are hearing directly from communities how our newcomer communities are afraid, and it is really sad to see that people who have been fleeing, persecution based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression in their countries of origin, and that have gone through a really hard migration pathway to come here to Canada, now are encountering very similar rhetorics being told at them and barriers around their identities. In September 20th, there were more than 78 rallies across the country to try to roll back hard-wing gains in the LGBTQ communities. And those many locations, as we can see, they organize on the view that children are being groomed or affected. Those are the rhetorics being told around. And just to give you a small debrief, in Vancouver, the counter protest was 10 times bigger than the protests themselves. But in Surrey, for instance, the counter protest was really small and the protest was really big. So there was a lot of violence happening and being directed at LGBTQ people. In Ontario, I know that the counter protest was larger. In Mississauga, the counter protest was outnumbered. In the Atlantic, the counter protests were larger in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador, and PEI. And in Hamilton, I heard from community members that although the media said that the counter protest was larger, and in a way great for saying that, the truth was that it wasn't, and they were the recipients of a lot of violent acts. So they threw rocks, smoke bombs, and they were largely teenagers. We also see a lot of children being part of the protest, and that can be really disturbing for us as well, to see how children are there, but then they're put in the front of the protest. Besides the protest, there has been some other strategies used to by the province. For instance, Saskatchewan, in August, the government of Saskatchewan announced that all students under the age of 16 must have parental consent to change their name and pronouns. And then a Regina judge ruled in favor of an LGBTQ advocacy group, saying that this could cause irreparable harm to vulnerable trans students. And then when that happened, the premier moved ahead with the plan to use a notwithstanding clause, which means to suspend the charter rights for the next 5 years with regards to this. So which means they could just apply that policy without having it to be tested against the Canadian Charters of Rights and Freedom. And what is going on right now is that IGAL is right now thinking of legal options and how to move ahead after the notwithstanding clause, which is a clause that really puts you in freeze mode legally around these issues. And in New Brunswick, you also see, similar to Saskatchewan, the government of New Brunswick and its policy 713 that puts transgender students in harm's way. And there is litigation going on with IGAL and local organizations in New Brunswick as interveners. So we don't know exactly what's been going on or what will happen there. And the other thing is the Conservative Party. As we also heard, they were embracing open attacks on queer and trans people at their convention, and there were 2 resolutions that happened at the Conservative Party. The first resolution could make it illegal for trans people, and especially trans women, to access spaces that correspond to their gender identity. And then the second could make it illegal for trans people, especially children, from being able to access healthcare services that they need. And we don't know what's going to happen in the next election. Pierre Poilievre might get elected as the next Prime Minister of Canada. So we also want to make sure that he's not going to take these two resolutions and make it into law in Canada, and what that might happen. And then in Vancouver, more locally, we've seen the rise of hate in attacks, in attacks and assaults to people. Like, for instance, there in November of 2022, there was a gay senior who was assaulted in the gay village. In February 2023, a newcomer couple was followed in the SkyTrain and was a victim of hate. They are preachers in the gay village coming but that has been ongoing for many years, and it happens not only in the gay village in Vancouver, but it happens in Toronto as well. And then there was an assault on a trans member of the community, where the doors to a mall were blocked. And so we're seeing vandalism, the United Church and its Pride display vandalized for the third year in a row. So there are things that are happening, but mainly what is also happening is we see less public support for LGBTQ people as well. Not only the rise of hate, but also the diminishing of public support for LGBTQI people. So this is the landscape, and on a personal level, with our organization, with Rainbow Refugee, well, we've seen people being excited about Pride, but also being very nervous about Pride. What will happen if we go? Are we safe in Pride? Are we not safe in Pride? Are we safe to go on the street? So things that before came very naturally and that people thought was safe to do or go about, now are being questioned, and those are the things that we need to take care of. So at this time, that is the landscape as I see it, and I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues to talk about the particular context that they may be seeing on their end.
Thank you, Alex. That was very helpful for us to, well, I'm in Vancouver, so I can see it. I will move to Onar.
Sure. Hi. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Onar Rushar. As Adam introduced, today I'm joining you from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I do apologize. I am terribly sick right now, so I hope that you'll be able to all hear me. I'll do my best. Also, because of the head cold, I will be I'm not going to be too long and mostly talk about the Ontario context. OCASI is a provincial umbrella agency, for those of you who may not be familiar, that act as a collective voice for immigrant and refugee serving agencies in Ontario. And within OCASI, PSI, Positive Spaces Initiative, is developed to share resources and increase the capacity across the immigrant and refugee sector to better and more effectively serve LGBTQI plus newcomers, refugees, and immigrants. What we observe and hear in Ontario, particularly in large urban contexts, is that the current wave of rising anti-2SLGBTQI hate, spearheaded by the conservative movement, is particularly targeting marginalized newcomer, immigrant, and faith-based communities through disinformation. That is, deliberate attempts to spread propaganda to create fear and suspicion and influence public opinion. This deliberate strategy of using disinformation, whether that will be on 2SLGBTQI plus rise, inclusive school policies and public education, or on sex ed curriculum, takes advantage of language barriers, lack of culturally and linguistically accessible resources and information available to newcomers, and make emotional appeals to their fears, insecurities, and material struggles for socioeconomic security in a new country, in order to mobilize them under the banner of code protecting family values and parental rights, unquote. We heard from some school staff and principals, for instance, that through various social media platforms, immigrant families were told that on June 1st, all the families across Canada will take their kids out of school to protest, quote, the promotion of Pride Month and indoctrination of gender ideology in the public education system, end quote. So while this call to keep kids out of school was directed to all Canadian parents, what we hear is that it was particularly an effective strategy within the newcomer and immigrant communities in the absence of information and transparency about the source of this call, which was a right-wing Christian pro-life, pro-family organization, its ultimate aims, and a confusion experienced by many families about school activities that may take place during the Pride Month. And I like to highlight that this has particularly negative and harmful impact on newcomer queer and trans youth, or youth who are questioning and exploring their gender and sexual identity. Indeed, within the last year, I'm aware of at least one newcomer youth, and I think one is even too many, who was exploring their gender identity, taking their life. And this happened within the context of frequent anti-LGBTQI plus demonstrations happening outside of their school and lack of school community and family support. And it is important to point out that although queer and trans youth are at the center of these debates, and used as a political tool by far-right groups to play on the fear and the emotions of the families, often their voices and experiences are absent or silenced. And unfortunately, the impact of this lack of support and silencing is compounded by the xenophobia and racism prevalent in the mainstream queer and trans spaces. As a result, queer and trans racialized immigrant youth face multi-layered erasure of their identities. We heard again, for instance, cases where visibly Muslim queer newcomer youth who sought support and affirmation from their school's LGBTQI plus club were told that they weren't fit as they didn't, quote, look queer, unquote, because they were wearing traditional clothing, and were dismissed and ignored as a result, which led to their further isolation from both their community of origin and from the LGBTQI communities where they run to look for support and affirmation. We find this alarming. Nothing that this is, you may think, this is already happening, but this is an increasing rates, and we find this alarming because we know that the social isolation is a key social determinant of both physical and mental health that impact the health outcomes and well-being of the LGBTQI newcomers and refugees. I want to share more, and I think I'm going to leave it here for Arti to continue, but social isolation is particularly in the alarming rates that we see the LGBTQI newcomer folks are experiencing within this context.
Thank you, Anna. Arti? Happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Adam, for the introduction much earlier. I would just like to share that I am currently joining today from Kajipuktuk, Halifax, and specifically Shubenacadie within Mi'kma'ki, Nova Scotia. And as both Alex and Onar have shared, I wanted to provide a bit of a context from the lands that I'm from. But before I do that, I also wanted to very quickly add that if you would like to participate, to share, to talk, please put your hands up, and our IT moderators today will add you as a panelist so that you can share your thoughts later during our discussion session. In terms of some of the things that we have been experiencing and seeing is definitely at the global level, I've received so many emails from individuals who are escaping SOGIESC or sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sexual characteristic related persecution. So I've had emails from folks from Uganda, from folks who are in Kenya, who are reaching out, just randomly sending out emails seeking, can you please help me and find a way to get out of here so that I can arrive as a refugee, or can come in as a student. So that was kind of like the first few indications when it all started earlier. And then I started to hear from school boards and provincial education departments seeking training to support their staff members at the school level, and seeing those departments spending more resources in the beginning to create equity positions related to queer and trans students. And then I saw the hate crime increasing. We have had several cases within Nova Scotia as a province where pride flags in schools were burnt by teenagers, and unfortunately, they were convicted. We saw an increase in bullying actions motivated by anti-queer and trans hate. And this is all, of course, happening at the time when we were all just coming out of physical and social distancing of COVID, and our young people were already really struggling with isolation. And then there were also arson of organizations' buildings displaying pride signages across the provinces. These are a few incidences that were actually captured in media. But then, given my position with both YMCA Greater Halifax Dartmouth Center for Immigrant Programs, as well as Rainbow Refugee Association of Nova Scotia, I started to hear from my clients and my co-workers and fellow partners, folks working in the same sectors, that parents have begun to reach out to them about content related to sexual orientation, gender identity and expressions, and sexual characteristics, not just in schools, but also in summer camps, in any activities that is just happening with relation to their students, to their children. That is when I started to pick up on the fact that, as Onar shared earlier, that there are misinformation being deliberately shared and targeted to specific communities. And also, there were also an increase in incidences where formal complaints were raised in schools regarding pride materials or queer and trans folks, and also increases around stereotyping and prejudice by people in position of power in schools, employers, and services. And by people in position of power, I mean not just people like, for example, um, uh, principal. I'm talking about teachers. I'm talking about teaching assistants who are telling students certain things that, who are like openly talking about, or being racist, who are being xenophobic towards like specific groups of people, or are being homophobic, or are not taking the kind of appropriate actions to stop or stem any hate motivated crime against young people. I also have heard from fellow coworkers and folks in the sector that people are losing access to housing. And because of my own work, I've come to recognize that hidden discrimination is very prevalent in a lot of different areas, but especially in housing. Tenants are finding it having a hard time to actually prove that they're being discriminated based on their gender identity or sexual orientation or their race. So it is even harder when, like in Nova Scotia, we don't have very strong tenant protection, and landlords are pretty much able to say no to a potential tenant without strong basis. And on top of that, I've also had clients who in the past had asked for taxi cheats in order to get to an event, but now are asking for, who refused in bus to take public transits, but now are asking for public transits because they're afraid to be in taxis alone with the driver. And I myself have just very recently have experienced a lot of hate motivated conversations with taxi drivers and public transits. And so they are saying that I want to take the transit because at least I won't be alone with another person, and there's safety in numbers. I can be a bit invisible. And that leads me to what Onar shared earlier around worsening fear of sharing any form of someone's identity. So we know, and it's established as a fact, that folks have always practiced in what we know as culture of silence or identity siloing, meaning they choose and select what identity to share in a space that they're participating in. in the cases that I worked with recently, folks are very afraid to say that they are a specific religion background or of a specific sexual orientation or gender identity background, because they are experiencing discrimination from so many different levels because of their identities. So they're very, very selective about how they can be out there. And in the context of Nova Scotia, I really appreciated the owner mentioned the mental health component part of it, because even before COVID, even before the increased for experiences of hate, if you go back to TransPulse, an organization that looked at well-being of queer and trans folks across the nation, Nova Scotia topped the rate of folks who were contemplating dying by suicide, especially queer and trans folks, with the highest percentage compared to any other places and provinces in this nation. And we also have the second highest rate for folks who are experiencing anxiety, depression, and verbal harassment. And I can only imagine what the rate could look like now, 3 years later, when that study was done. So I'm seeing an increased need for informed and preventative mental health services, and I'm talking beyond counseling. I'm talking around disordered eating. I'm talking around psychosis intervention. Folks are really struggling around mental illnesses, given the climate that we are in right now.
Arthi, thanks a lot. Thank you, folks. It was super helpful to have the insights from different regions and cities. It's upsetting, so I will invite you again to take care of yourself in the best way you can. If you need to reach out to Sharalyn, please feel free to reach out directly to her if you need any emotional support. I will open the floor for a few questions from our attendees. We have almost 130 people attending. So if you have any questions that's regarding the rise of anti-2SLGBTQI hate, that will be the right time to do so.
And can I add, Adam, also, if people want to share their particular context of what they're seeing in their areas, that is also welcome, so that we can get a scan of what's going on across Canada.
Yeah, Wilbur?
Hello, folks. My name's Wilbur, pronouns he, him, and I am on the unceded territory of the Sioux people and Okanagan Nation in Kelowna, British Columbia. Just a bit of context for what I see happening. The work that I'm doing and my organization is doing, and local community organizations in Kelowna and around British Columbia, we're seeing a lot of pushback on symbolism for Pride, like rainbow crosswalks, flags around schools and in schools. Recently, over the last 2 weeks, there's been, in Kelowna alone, there has been 3 Pride rainbow crosswalks vandalized at school property, including at the school district office on the weekend, which is under police investigation. What we see in the online discourse about this from folks is that they feel like, this is something that we're pushing in people's faces by having this symbolism. So I think that we need to look at ways to counter that message. From my own perspective, it's really, really important to have that symbolism, especially in schools, because it makes kids feel welcome and accepted. And there's so many cases where perhaps school is the only safe place that they feel that they can be themselves. So the other thing that's happening too is we have a provincial election coming up in October 2024. We currently have an NDP government in British Columbia, which is very progressive in terms of support for the community. However, there's some things that are happening within the conservative movement in British Columbia, which are really concerning. There's a party that's just been established and has got official status now in the legislature called the BC Conservatives, and they're extreme right if they have said if they get in power that they will remove SOGI resources from schools. They're very homophobic and transphobic. We've had the case before where a Conservative government actually abolished the Human Rights Commissioner's Office, which was reinstated 5 years ago by the current government. And there's a danger of that happening. Also, the other danger is the BC United Party, which is the main opposition party in British Columbia, which was formerly called BC Liberals, which is actually a misnomer because they are a Conservative party. They are losing in the polls to the BC Conservatives. So you can see some leaning into the right-wing rhetoric around 2SLGBTQI plus rights coming from the BC United Party. So in order to shore up votes and retain some sort of power as the official opposition, I feel like we can see ongoing rhetoric coming up into the election in 2024 that we need to be proactive about in terms of that kind of messaging. So, the other thing that is happening, community responders and leaders in the communities across Canada are responding to this hate in a leadership role. Many folks like myself are volunteers. We're being targeted with hate online, with attacks, with defamation, personal attacks in person, which I personally have had experience with recently with the counter protests and people following me down the street and calling me out. So intimidation tactics. So those are other things that we need to be really aware of and help protect our community leaders. So that's just a little bit of perspective I wanted to add into the conversation.
Thank you, Wilbur. That's helpful to know. We're always short on time. I will move on to the next question. I'll invite our panelists as well to be mindful about the timing so we can open the floor for participants to ask questions and comments as well. Arti, I will stay with you for our second questions. How are you as an organization impacted, and what are you doing to increase safety for LGBT? We heard about the impact, but if you wanna talk more, and what are you doing to increase safety for LGBTQI newcomer communities?
Thank you, Adam. One of the things that came out as we were preparing for this webinar is we started to question what is safety. So I think one of the key things I would like all of us to think a bit about today, and maybe perhaps one of the biggest takeaway, is to think about how safety looks differently. In my work, personally, I've had to really think about what it means to engage with the young people. It means that that I am very openly signaling that I am a resource person that they can have access to, because as I mentioned earlier, many are choosing not to be very visible with their multiple identities. And that is also something that I would really encourage folks who are in the positions that you are. And, as one of our participant shared earlier, it comes with its own risks. But that's when you work very strategically around thinking a bit about what safety in number means. So for example, young people that I work with and like adults that I work with no longer travel alone. They travel in pairs. And the spaces that I organize events at, we have security folks, meaning like community members, security folks, who are participating in that. And another thing that we are focusing on is also, my training that I used to provide look very differently now, in the sense that we have always provided it with many folks presented. Now we focus on the language of rights, meaning when we are focusing on someone's rights, does not mean that you can practice the rights that you have as a person and then deny another person their access to rights. Meaning you can have your opinions, you can have your what you believe in, but ensure that you're not acting on any of your opinions or beliefs that would directly affect the rights of another person's ability to live without experiencing discrimination. And what does that look like? This is where if you have a privilege or you have privileges, recognize it, learn how to use those privileges in spaces that require us to speak up, because we need that more than ever now. And I know that many of us are multitasking, many of us carry many different identities, but I encourage you to think a bit about what lived intersectionality looks like. You can very well be someone who's experiencing discrimination in one space and not in the other. So think a bit about that as we are working, as we are navigating spaces in public spaces. This is especially important in the context of stereotyping or prejudices that are being spoken about in public. When you're working with youth, prioritize education when possible in a safe and accessible manner, meaning you could have all the information available, leaflets and things like that, and you don't have to hand it in public. You can say that it's available in a specific space. You can go and collect them there, or you can make it available in spaces that they can have access to without being seen. And also, another thing that I will share, and then I'll pass it on, is to, if you have had learned de-escalation techniques, now is the time to use it. If you haven't learned some, you don't have to be someone who has to be able to put your body in between two different peoples, but at least learn how to be a non-bystander, an active bystander who's able to de-escalate a situation, for example, by just asking someone or removing someone from a space before it becomes worse. And last but not least, check in internally, see what your staff needs, especially if they're queer and trans folks. Look at, revisit or revise your policies and guidelines on gender, sexual orientation-based discrimination. What processes are in place to support queer and trans employees and clients? What does accommodation requests look like? Pay extra attention to what members of these communities are currently experiencing and what they may need in terms of accommodation in their works. Thank you.
Before we
Thank
move to the
you.
next panelist, sorry, I'm just going to read a question that's shown up in the Q&A for you to maybe have in your minds as you respond, Onar and Alex. So Zara's asking, how would you educate and raise awareness with parents about homophobia and transphobia and what is going on in schools? As some are not homophobic, but perceive the discussion in schools as promoting homosexuality or promoting transitioning to another gender, rather than raising awareness. And they say it's going from one extreme to another extreme. So how do you talk to these parents to explain the importance of these discussions in education? Thank you.
Zahra, very good question. Thanks for asking it. And Ryan, I see your hands. I will give you space to talk, I promise, after our panelists finish their intervention. Okay. Thank you. Onar, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. I was told I had 3 minutes, so I'm going to try to keep it as brief as I could. Thank you, Arti, for sharing very practical strategies, as well as to raising the question of safety and what does it really mean, and in different ways that we could think about safety. So I like to ground my response with the premise that it is the people on the ground that keep each other safe. We learn from history and experience that we cannot really rely on state or state institutions to increase safety. So the question is for us how to cultivate safety. And we strongly believe that the refugee and immigrant serving sector can play a key role, regardless of one works directly with trans or queer refugees and immigrants. And as mentioned before, safety can mean different things, can take different forms, and it can be facilitated through different ways. For OCASE PSI, I will come from a little bit different perspective, and because our primary focus is capacity building of the sector through education and consultation, our strategies focus on expanding our education and outreach efforts. This may actually also hopefully answer some of the questions about how to engage. So we believe first and foremost that we need to start with educating ourselves collectively as a sector and as settlement workers about the sexual and gender diversity in Global South. Why? Its history and present-day expressions of this diversity, various forms it takes, understanding the impact of colonialism, Christian fundamentalism, and evangelical missionary efforts to erase and eradicate this history. So that when we hear claims, whether it is through the disinformation spread by the far right, or from our clients or families we work with, or from the school and with the parents, that LGBTQI plus people do not exist in their culture or country, or that their religion is not compatible with gender and sexual diversity, we can have the knowledge and vocabulary to respectfully and confidently counter these arguments and to dispel the myths about the trans and queer people in the global south, so that we can address the growing tendency that pits racialized and immigrant communities from global south against the LGBTQI identities constructed as white and Western. As I believe this is the very polarization that provides the backdrop upon which the far right builds their disinformation campaign. And I really think this is also particularly pertinent within the current global and local context, where we unfortunately see the pinkwashing is being increasingly utilized to justify particularly increasing Islamophobia in Canada. So first of all is really to understanding and educating ourselves about the identities and then resisting this polarization of the narratives. Secondly, educating ourselves about the local and Canadian context in relation to 2SLGBTQI identities and experiences, legal rights, inclusive policies and practices, so that we can actively and persistently counter the disinformation that disproportionately targets racialized, immigrant and faith-based groups, so that we can foster a welcoming environment within our workplaces where our clients feel safe and supported to share part of themselves that they may be hiding from you for the fear of discrimination, so that we can provide, which can be life-saving, sometimes information and supports that enable people to thrive in their local communities. We also strongly emphasize the importance of creating and fostering spaces, whether through in drop-in groups, peer groups, or structured support groups that center the experiences and agency of the queer and trans newcomers, particularly racialized newcomers, so that we can resist that binary narratives and alternative narratives with more nuance and complexity can emerge and take shape. Narratives in which racialized, queer and trans newcomers can see themselves represented and reflected with all their complex experiences, relationships, and identities, which increases safety, in turn increases safety for them. And the lack of nuanced narratives and frameworks, or their very marginal existence, usually force people to choose either to embrace Western notions of out and proud, liberated queer, or closeted and oppressed victim. And this exists, that reinforces this polarization. And this polarization also enables, again, as I said, the far-right movement to appeal to the fears and worries of racialized and immigrant families. So I cannot emphasize how important it is to create that space for the people to see reflected the different narratives, to be their experiences with all their complexity to be reflected, and creating a space. Again, I can list more, including recognizing in the interconnections on the grassroots and public sector levels, but I'm going to leave to the discussion. I'd like to give space to hear from other panelists and the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Onar. And also we received a question from Oriel. How do you navigate the use of anti-immigrant rhetoric, like go home, in recent counter-protests to the rise of LGBTQ plus hate? Has that been an identified issue? And if so, how do you tackle it? So if you want to keep this in mind, Alex, while answering the question as well, if you'd like. I personally never didn't hear it in our counter protest in Vancouver, but maybe some people did in other cities.
Thank you, Adam. First, I want to say that this is also very polarizing, and so what we've seen is a lot of rhetoric about the West and the East, and what is progressive, what is backwards, what is colonial, what is anti-colonial, what is being imposed on centered cultures and not, and so that kind of conversations are happening. And also we need to think about misinformation, and that is also in answer to Sara, which is there's a lot of misinformation that is being passed on to parents right now about what actually the school curriculum is about and what we are talking about when we're, when when children can change their name or their gender. There's misinformation telling parents that children will go into surgeries without their consent, that they're going to be mutilating their bodies. Those are the languages being replicated. And so we need to consider those misinformation. And on the other side, the xenophobia that may come with some groups, for sure, and white supremacy lives and thrives in all aspects of our society. So we also need to counteract that. Now, speaking about strategies more from a national perspective as well, and you need to think about. Are you associated with an organization? What are the capacities of your organization? Are you just a person, an individual person? Are you part of a group? Before you decide which strategies or the ways in which you want to interact. But also the other thing I wanted to say before I go into naming those strategies is that when we think about counteracting misinformation, and when we think about creating new ways of thinking about the information, relationships are at the center of this. So building relationships with the communities and understandings and conversations and circles of those conversations may bring a long way. A lot of the communities that are in the protest, the newcomer communities, really are feeling defranchised right now. They haven't been welcomed completely into their communities. They haven't feel that the schools are welcoming. They've been dismissed in their also in their concerns. So there hasn't been sometimes not enough empathy and compassion in the ways in which we address their questions, because their questions can be triggering, but at the same time, we haven't built bridges. So we also need to think about, when we're talking about strategies, not all strategies need to be oppositional. Some of them may be about building bridges and actually reaching out to those communities, and particularly letting Brown, Muslim, queer communities reaching out to their communities and having their supports to be able to hold this conversation. So right now there are legal strategies, and there's many ways to be helpful as well, which is what is going on in your province? Is there been any particular discrimination? Could there be any legal action taken? For instance, in the cases of Saskatchewan and New Brunswick, that was necessary. So if it happens in other provinces, identifying experts, identifying a particular case, and then being in connection with your local civil rights organizations, and also potentially with IGAL, who's taking this on more of a national level around that. There's also political strategies like contacting your MP as a federal level, contacting your MPPs or your MLAs, and making sure that those kinds of legislations are not being put in your provinces as well, contacting your city councils and mayors, and having and holding those conversations. Also, having conversations within your community about a community safety and well-being plan. And sometimes, our queer and trans communities, our racialized and brown communities are not necessarily safe with law enforcement agencies. So therefore, having community safety and well-being plans that have to do with community engagement, with having mutual support, with de-escalation and conflict resolution, centering restorative justice, talking about resource allocation, transparency and accountability, and alternatives to policing might be a good idea in holding those conversations. The other thing is having allies join and addressing and protecting our communities. For instance, our friends of the Canada Anti-Hate Network put together a Pride Defense Guide. And I'm going to be sharing some resources. So I'm going to be copy pasting some of these resources on the chat for you to be able to access them. So that's the Anti-Hate Pride Effective Guide that you can access also when you are, how do you include some allies in being able to promote some safety for us as well. Already psychosocial supports were talked about, so I'm not going to talk about that, but I do want to emphasize that isolation of some community members is important to keep members connected and participating in community. That is the best way for us to keep us safe. and the relational strategy we talked about. And there's also educational campaign. For instance, there's an online action called Say No to Mo. You can learn more about that online action. Here, I'm going to put the link on the chat as well from Momentum. There was also an educational workshop that is actually happening tomorrow from 2:30 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And it's called Together We Will Win, a workshop on campaigning and messaging for trans youth. And I'm going to put also the link there for you to go and register if you are interested in that educational workshop that will give you some tools around that as well. Here you have it. And then, for instance, also there are petitions that are going around, like tell the government of Canada to act for queer safety. And so you can sign those petitions right here. That's the first one. Copying the hyperlink for you as well, giving you a lot of resources. There's a petition for Polybier to say no to transphobia. So it's the no to transphobia petition. You can also sign it there, right there on the chat. And there's Facts Not Fear in Public Education petition. And that is very important to also center in a sense that what we're dealing here is fear. So how do we deal with people's fears? What is the best way to deal? And that is dismythifying and talking about actually what is evidence-based as opposed what is fear-mongering or what people are trying to feed each other to put each other in oppositions. There are also other strategies. I don't want to go into more detail about that, but I want to say that what it is important here is to try to counter out the rhetoric of us and them as well, and the othering of communities. There is no, in our newcomer refugee communities, there is no Western versus East in our own trans identities. We hold our racialized identities, we hold our migrant identities, we hold our trans identities, and they're all one beautiful complexities in our bodies, and therefore, and we are fully part, an integral part of the community. So we can't divide our identities in us and them in a consistent level. So also having that conversation and demystifying a little bit about what is going on there. Thank you, Adam, and I'll pass it on so that we can share with our audience as well.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Very helpful resources. Thanks for sharing with us. Yeah, I'll open it to our attendees now. And Ryan, as promised, please go ahead.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, everyone. First of all, I'm just very grateful to be here, also to be a guest living, playing, and working on the land of Mi'kmaq people, or what's known as Nova Scotia. When I arrived here 3 years ago, I wasn't expecting to be that anxious about living my queerness in Canada, in our own communities. That makes me sad, actually, because I was not about having high expectations, but as well as having a system where I believe that Canada, in a way, is pushing our communities in getting into the integration part under worship communities, which is, in my belief, we are creating more closed communities in a way, but at the same time, we can't find our own circles where I believe, where I came from Lebanon, where some spaces for us, it could be from a coffee shop to a pub or a place to meet, it's hard to find it here. But luckily, I work here at the YMCA, which was also a space where I met with RT, and I wanted to highlight that program. But unfortunately, with the very lack of funding and programs here in Nova Scotia, and I'm not sure about other provinces, we're struggling, actually. We're struggling to find our own communities. I'm talking here as an individual as well as a service provider. And coming from this lived experience to the question of this meeting today of how can we address the current rise of anti-2SLGBTQIA plus hate without further further harm? What can we do? I believe there were different levels of demands and agendas and conflicting thoughts in those rallies. And we really want to break down those conflicting thoughts. We really want to at least target the people who were really concerned about their kids, why they were considering themselves in a way, some of them, that they are allies. I had a friend that she's a psychologist and a lot of trust with her approaches in the community, and they were hearing to her experience. And when I came here, I invited her to some of local parties for LGBTQ folks, and she was totally okay, and she had her friends in Lebanon. But later on, she was leading actually those if you want I'm not sure if I want to say campaign, but in a way, she was leading that in a way because she wants to protect her kids from in a way, she wants to get at least the consent to create at least guidelines on sex and gender identities in the school. And I will mention in the end now just why did she brought this, because of an incident that was really happening in the school, and it's totally different than being a rumor. A rumor. Again, let's start by asking these questions of us as teachers, service providers, or community leaders in the 2SLGBTQIA plus community. Are we aware of these complex dynamics to address this issue effectively, especially when it comes to our reflections on how religion or culture is brought into a way to justify homophobia or transphobia, and vice versa, how xenophobia and Islamophobia is used into further creating this harm and colonial disclosures of racialized communities usually. How can we really work on these guidelines and create a space we make sure we're not causing harm? I was asking myself, and I would encourage everyone here as a 2SLGBTQ community, are we able to discuss basic human rights? Are we able to get people really on a round table to discuss basic human rights? And here we're not talking about, debating, because myself, I work at the Gender-Based Violence Prevention Project. We really discuss these frameworks as laws and legislations here in Canada. It would start from child protection laws that most of the newcomers, they wouldn't agree about it, but also to the 2SLGBTQIA plus rights. And can we shift this narrative of saving saving our kids or the gender identity in the schools? How can we ensure that in our different work that we can create, maybe creating guidelines that align with the relevant laws and legislations in our work? I was just trying from the beginning to say that I had different people from my community, which is as I said, the Lebanese community. I had to out myself in a very bad way to defend ourselves as queer people while interacting with them. Parents were sharing their fears of their kids' education and identities, led by huge misinformation. You know how this information is going around them and the rumors. And two examples, a parent called me just to ask me, how can the school or the teacher let a girl pass her exams in a way when the girl is converted to a cat? And when the girl is coming with a litter box and she's refusing even to communicate as a human? That was the question. They just jumped over the gender identities that we are converting their kids. And that was a rumor, and it was going very badly in the community. But the fact was actually from a school that brought a parent actually, and who was a parent with a puppet, and they named it Mo. And actually this reflects a very racist name, and it unfolds a lot of Islamophobia. And at the same time, this puppet was brought to 7 years old kids,
Right.
creating and talking about
Right.
that. And the result, I would say, that the Lebanese community here in Halifax, they are creating and working on opening the first private Catholic school, so people can pull out their kids from public schools and what a social fracture we're creating now. I still have hope for this not to happen, but I believe that hope is in action, and I hope
We hope
that we
that
can take action in bringing them
thank
together.
you, Ryan. So thankful for your insight. Sorry for I interrupted you. We can talk about this forever. We have short time, and I want to give space for Norma as well. Before I give you space, Norma, we have a question in the Q&A. Do you have advice for frontline workers to advocate to organizational leadership that doesn't support engaging in these debates, countering misinformation, or communicating to clients, staff, and the public that the organization is in support of the queer community? Norma, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Adam. I just want my answer, or the thing that I want to say, is going to be very short and quick. I hear you, Ryan, what you're saying. I hear what you're talking about. I'm a Lebanese trans woman, and when I moved here, before I moved here, the image that I had about Canada was completely different than the reality that I'm living now. And I was engaged in a lot of conversations with Lebanese people here in Vancouver. I'm privileged enough to work in a queer organization, be able to have a job, and yet the situation is scary. The misinformation that is being shared with all the communities, but specifically because you talked about the Lebanese community, which is my community, is extremely dangerous. And the example that you said about the cat, someone else shared that example with me about a dog. And now they looked me straight in the eye and said that you are a trans person. That was a choice. You chose to be a woman, and schools are forcing the kids to become dogs and tables and cars. And one thing that when I met with one of the people who are behind SOGI 123 program, the only thing that I told them, I begged them to have translation to other languages, specifically to Arabic, because if you go to the website, you read everything on their website in English and it's perfect. And there's no mention to transitioning. All the mention is to love, acceptance, respect, and anti-bullying and anti-harassment. No mention to transitioning or forcing kids to do surgeries. And the only request that I ask them is, please have it translated to several languages, Arabic included, because we're seeing a big amount of people who speak Arabic from Lebanon or all the region who are protesting against this. And the majority of them are protesting because they are afraid. They are parents. They care about their kids. They left wars and they left miserable lives. They moved here because they want their kids to have the best life possible. And they are scared, genuinely scared. And one other thing as well is the Lebanese media in Lebanon, talk shows in Lebanon, are talking about SOGI 123 education program in Canada. While we don't have schools and basic human rights in Lebanon, they're talking about the schools. So this is how people are getting to the notion of this is scary. They are forcing our kids to transition. No more kids. So this is what I had to say. I'm happy to take the conversation somewhere else with you, Ryan, and see how we can work together.
Thank you, Norma. Brent, I see you raise your hand. I do want to jump to the third section of our discussion, and then I will give you space to talk after, just to make sure that our demands are shared with all of you. Onar, do you want us to start on our demands on city, municipality, provincial, and federal level?
For sure. Sorry. First of all, Norma, thank you so much for also raising the question of translation and the availability of linguistically accessible resources and information. This is one of the biggest demands that we would like to see happening, and support from all levels of government. I like the first start that first and foremost, we need to hold all levels of government accountable in taking responsibility. What we see in general is in different levels of governments throughout about each other in the GTA, in the Greater Toronto contexts. We've seen this most recently in the summer, where a number of asylum seekers from the African continent, some of which were part of the LGBTQI community, found themselves sleeping on the sidewalks of Toronto, as there was no space for them in the shelter system. So the federal government claimed that it was the responsibility of the municipal government, and the municipality said that they had no funds to provide shelter, and then the provincial government was already out of the picture. So eventually the churches, particularly Black churches, stepped into to provide temporary shelter for the refugees, which is neither sustainable nor acceptable. So our first task is to really to hold all levels of government accountable, and particularly when we see the growing trends onto funding cuts in the public sector, and realize that all the public sector are interconnected. So whether that be to be public education system or the healthcare or settlement sector, that impact not only these cuts not only impact the available services and supports, but the ability of the staff and the service providers to engage meaningfully with the communities they support. I think you raised so many great questions about the building relationships with the community, countering the disinformation, educating ourselves. How we are going to do this when, as service workers, they're already struggling, they are already, how are they going to engage this critical reflection and all these activities when they are already overworked, underpaid, and struggling to meet the demands for their services? So, and then to see that what happens in one sector is closely impacting the other sector. And again, for countering this disinformation campaigns, and funds and resources are necessary to create culturally and linguistically accessible tools and resources for the communities, including digital and social media literacy skills. Canada's federal 2SLGBTQI action plan was announced with much fanfare more than 14 months ago. However, nowhere in the plan we saw an mention of the LGBTQI refugees or immigrants specifically. This omission is disheartening, given that so many community groups, so many people raise these issues and the challenges and the barriers and the struggles in the community consultations and submissions to the federal government. So we need a coordinated response from all levels of government that engaged all the ministries, particularly the health, youth, education, housing, employment, immigration, global affairs, with specific action items. We need really the federal and provincial governments to invest in settlement services and supports and programming that are 2SLGBTQI+ inclusive, developed by intersectional lens, and responsive to the specific needs of queer and trans refugees and immigrants across the country. This means providing specific and increased funding for training, capacity building, and resource development to create LGBTQI positive settlement services and supports, professional development opportunities, establishing dedicated funding for the anti-racism related initiatives, and investing in resources that support the development of safe and support spaces and inclusive programs. Here, I'd like to address the question around how to advocate for your agency when there is an unwillingness to support or raise these issues, that there is a power in collective voice. So whether that will be the collective voice within your agency that you come together and raise these issues, whether you coordinate, reach out with other agencies within your local community, or that like OCASI exists for that reason as an umbrella agency, if you are in Ontario context, to reach out to the collectivities, like in the nation, whether in the national level or in your provincial or local level, to reach out, because there is a power in the collective voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Honor. RT, where's RT?
Thank you, Adam.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to just very quickly, very aware of the time, to share that in the context of Nova Scotia, I think many folks know that it has seen quite a bit of like natural disasters in the past, in relation to everything else that's also been happening across the nation around like wildfires and things like that. So given that, and also very ambitious planning for immigration, especially around the Atlantic immigration program, we have had a surge in population numbers. So the focus is right now very much on housing and as well as healthcare. So anything that's beyond that, we are not getting the attention of the government folks. But this is where I think what Cameron said in the question, how do we get our organizations to pay attention to these things? I think that's where it all begins. It's when you ask folks to be more representative, like putting on those signs, signatures around like pride, put it out there, let folks know that this is very important for us. We are taking a stand. And also around increasing funding for folks who are in schools, in education, to have positions around, when I say equity, not just around like hiring someone who looks like the member of the community and then like say, okay, boom, we are done. Actually hire someone who's trained, who's able to provide practical solutions, and who's trained in practical intervention strategies and developing educational materials and informative materials that can then be shared and then can also provide capacity building trainings. So that is at like the municipal level. In terms of the provincial level, don't just make a statement. Don't just say that you support queer and trans people. Actually make the effort and reflect it in actions by creating spaces in your government, but also creating spaces in your communities, safer spaces. One of the best things about this ugly things that's happening in our communities is that, especially within the context of Nova Scotia, where our pride organization was not able to organize a parade earlier this year, so many community members, nonprofit organizations, and folks came together to organize rallies, events, and just did amazing work. But that should not be just on the community's shoulders alone. When these initiatives are coming up, support these folks. If they need permit, provide that permit as soon as you can without like delaying it. And then with regards to like the federal government, but also this last point that I have, it has to be for towards all government, is increase awareness around resources that you already have. One of the biggest sticky point for me is that we have access to translators, to interpreters, but then people don't know that we have them in the healthcare systems. You have to go and dig in websites in order to have access to that. And another example that the Coalition from Borders to Belonging that it's been just talking about for years is to improve access to the interim federal health program by making sure that the service care providers, especially mental health service providers, don't have to navigate the bureaucracy of the program in order to even have refugees have access to their programs. So reduce those things that we are telling you that are barriers, make them accessible, because that is half of the battle already won.
Thank you, Arti. Alex?
Yes, thank you. I want to comment that Randall Garrison, which is an MP, put out there a white paper with 29 comprehensive policy recommendations to help make equality for trans and gender diverse people a reality. And I'm putting up a link to that. Now, within those 29 recommendations, 3 of them were around refugees, recommendations 17, 18, and 19. And some of them were some of them were about creating clear pathways to safety for trans and gender diverse claimant by allowing the organizations to provide support. Some of them were about allowing in-country applications, and some of them were about discriminatory policies of denying coverage for all gender affirming care, etc. Now, these recommendations were not done in consultation with various organizations. So what I want to say is that they do require, and we are reaching out and talking to the MP to say, it would be great that you could consult with many of us about the recommendations, in particularly the ones regarding refugees, because some of them make sense and some of them don't make sense. But just to tell you that there are MPs looking into this, that there are people that it is good to engage in a political level with your MPs to bring your concerns around that. There are other calls to the Canadian government at a federal level to, for instance, to appoint a special representative on addressing and preventing anti-2SLGBTQIA plus hate, and mandated to provide guidance and undertake activities addressing the rise. So having a particular person from government who is appointed to deal with this, to fund and new grant programs to address anti-LGBTQ. So of course, putting out resources and information campaigns to condemn the rise of anti-LGBTQ hate very publicly, to also ensure that we are addressing anti-2SLGBTQIA in the National Action Plan on combating hate, to host national summit on third-party violence with unions, government employees, and civil society organizations. So those are some of the things that we can ask our government, our federal government, to do. At a provincial level, we know that, and we already talked about that, education is and the legislations around educations and policies around education. So reach out to the MPPs and to the MLAs and ask them to take a strong stance for LGBTQ, trans, newcomer communities as well, and to make sure that those policies are not passed at the parliament level or at the legislation level. And then to the municipal government, reach out to your councillors. So we here in Vancouver had at least one conversation with one city councillor. We still have not had the opportunity to speak with the mayor, but we had a conversation with one city councillor who was very interested in addressing this and gathered together various organizations from Vancouver. And some of the things that are going to come up out of this is a safety motion. So a motion to talk about the safety of transgender, diverse, and two-spirit people within the city, to also provide some resources, some city grants and some resources to make LGBTQI organizations stronger, so that we are able to do and continue the work of educating our communities and consistently having relationships with our community. And also creating advisory committees within the cities in which transgender diverse folks can provide advisory expert opinions also to city councillors. So those are some of the strategies, but I also would recommend that you at a social civil level in your own organizations hold conversations. I think that it is important to start the conversations. And for those people who are asking about frontline workers, and I know it's hard to sometimes navigate power imbalances and structures within the organizations, but what I have found is that if we keep bringing the issues, if we are persistent and consistent, at one point those conversations are going to start happening. So be persistent and consistent. Make alliances with other organizations who might be working already on this, and ask them to reach out to your organization. Ask them, hey, what are you doing to address this? Because this is a common effort that we need to do together. And it is not the responsibility of one, it's the responsibility of all. I'm going to leave it here because I know that Brent wants to intervene, and there might be a couple of more people.
Thank you, Alex. Brent, I hope you can summarize what you want to say in 2 minutes. I hate to do that, but just to respect everyone's time, please go ahead.
Sure, I'll try. I'm an agender settler who's grateful to live on the unceded Okanagan territory. I'm a software architect, and I'm inspired to use what I've learned from activism to make software technology to work for marginalized people. I am working on a social enterprise project to connect marginalized communities using a new smartphone app that will replace potentially Facebook, WhatsApp, and Signal groups, these sort of isolated, exclusive groups that we're all using to find support. I'm trying to connect people on a larger scale using AI and democratic process. And I'm looking for, it's going to be a cooperative organization, and I'm looking for people who are interested in discussing this, maybe becoming partners or directors of this, to build something new, to help us raise the visibility of 2SLGBTQ people and get out in the streets to actually organize against all this hate.
Thank you, Brent. Yeah, first I would like to thank to open space first. If anyone from the attendees would like to ask a last question, now it's the right time to raise your hand. Okay, Brent, please provide your contact info in the chat so people can reach out to you. Our panelists, Alex, Onar, Arti, thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts and insights with us. That was very helpful to me. And thank you thank you everyone for attending. I hope this has been a good use of your time, and it was a good learning opportunity for all of us to take what we've learned and share it with our communities and to better equip us to deal with our clients. Thank you so much. Our next webinar will be on November 23rd, mainly to discuss the challenges that refugee claimants inside Canada face. I will send you the registration link with the recording tomorrow in your email, so please keep an eye if you'd like to register and attend. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day. Charlene, Norma, thank you for your help. Bye,
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Norma and Arti, if you can stay for just a minute, that'd be great.
I guess. Oh, Arti is still here.
I will send you a link to debrief in a bit, if you don't mind.
That'd be perfect.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
And Onar, do you want to debrief? Oh, did we lose Onar?
Let's jump on the link that Adam sends.